that you can consider it in 21-22. We are bound by Rotorua Lakes Council also deliberating on their long-term plan.
Can I talk about the museum, Mr. Chairman? Over the last 15 years, we've actually fundraised about 75 million for that museum, ballpark figure, to get it up and running, to be an iconic national identity. We did 25, we've got another 50 on board, and now RDC are asking us for another 4 to do exhibition space. Regional Council hasn't contributed to that 75 million, my understanding, and I think it behoves us to take another look, because what I'd like to see is a quid pro quo, is that currently when it opens again in 3 to 4 years' time, don't know, that Rotorua residents can view that museum as many times as you like, free of charge. So mum, dad, the kids can go along free of charge. If Regional Council contributes a PC sum, wouldn't it, the quid pro quo could be, if RDC accepts it, that Bay of Plenty residents can view that museum free of charge. I see that as the payback for people to come to Rotorua and view Te Arawa Tonga at its finest, and that's the way I would view it, Mr. Chairman, in terms of us providing a sum for the fit out.
Yeah, Councillor Winters, but the resolution as I read it doesn't preclude that.
So I'm preempting it.
The resolution here says, can the thing be resubmitted in 22-23?
Yep.
As opposed to making that decision today.
Yep, and I'm happy with that, Mr. Chairman, because what we've just found out is the rebuilding is delayed 3 years for rebuilding.
Well, that's nothing to do with the 4 million they're seeking.
No.
So the fact that it's construction, what they're seeking and they need the money now is to actually do the design and planning and all the rest of it.
For the exhibition space.
Yep. So they need the money, they need a decision from us. We're either going to contribute or not.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is running a parallel course, if I may comment now, that there's a geotechnical issue they need to sort out. It'll take 3 or 4 years to work it through, but at the same time, they need to run parallel now the development of the exhibitions and all those processes. I just wanted to say that the building is a national icon. It's not going to be a national icon, it is already a national icon, the most photographed building in the country, and obviously a very strategic part of what's to do with development as well, from telling its stories, but also its visitor numbers as well in terms of the economy. So I guess it's on the table. There is an urgency around this particular part of the museum request, and if we wait 2 or 3 years, it won't be able to achieve its objective of being able to open with an exhibition of the type they're looking at. Simple.
So can I just see clarity from the Chief Executive, because when we met with the Mayor and the curator of the museum, Stuart Brown, they said to us, I'm going from memory here, that they do not want to draw this down immediately. It will be drawn down over a number of years as they come to do the fit out of the display area. They just needed the accommodation that they had the funding available to actually do that. Can I just set some clarities whether or not that's your recollection?
Yes, that's correct, and I think that leads to the staff putting on page 75 that you can consider a compromise approach, such as agreeing a lower grant, such as the $200,000 requested for 21-22 without prejudice to consideration of further funding as part of future annual plans. So they are building the displays over the next few years, and if you were to seek to support that without prejudice, then you could consider a lower grant of $200,000 as requested for 21-22.
Did you see Stuart Brown's memo last night? No. Because that explains why they need the commitment now.
So what would the source of funding be?
Regional fund.
Chief Executive.
It's through you to you in terms of where you'd seek to allocate funds from, whether it be from the regional fund or increasing rates or through debt.
Mr Clark?
I actually totally support reassurance for funding, whatever term it is for Rotorua. I mean, as the Tāori says, it's not only a regional taonga, it's a national taonga, and it's to be sort of grouped even with the lakes issue that these are. Rotorua, the bigger picture needs our support. And the other thing I'll chuck in there is that in terms of the COVID experience, there's no place that is bum kicked as badly as Rotorua, and I just think if we can, we should provide some optimism and support in that space.
Thank you. Councillor Love?
Well, thank you, Mr Chairman. I suppose I must be consistent with my approach during the day. I certainly have sympathy with the case. I am the chairman of a museum myself and understand the issues which you face. However, what worries me is the precedent this may set. I am not sure that funding museums is regional council responsibility and ratepayers' responsibility. And indeed, the precedent I'm worried about is if we are seen to fund this one, then I'm sure Tauranga City Council will be next on the agenda. I'm not quite sure I want to fund that one either. I don't like museums, but only the ones I support. But anyway, and equally there are other museums in the Bay of Plenty, and this might open up Pandora's box for us. So great sympathy, but I'm not particularly in favour of it.
Thank you, Councillor.
However, Mr Chairman, it is economic development, isn't it?
Yes. True.
Councillor Rose?
Yeah, look, I think speaking from a young person point of view, museums may be a place for the older things, but having a museum and one of such stamina as the Rotorua Museum is something that I think is necessary, not only for economic development, but also for rangatahi to learn their history and to learn actually where things started and where things have come from. And I think this is also a good opportunity for our council to really show that we are a regional council, because I can say today there's been a lot of talk about the Western Bay and Tauranga, and this is actually a good opportunity for us to really fund something that will actually hit the hearts of so many across not only Rotorua but also the Bay of Plenty.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Councillor Thompson?
I'd like to move that we make a grant of $4 million to be funded from the regional fund towards this project.
I'll second it.
So is that an amendment, or are you making an amendment to bullet point 9 there?
Well, those aren't anything, they're just staff recommendations. I'm actually proposing that motion.
Yes, but I need to capture it in the body of these other resolutions. So if you want to do that, could I suggest that the amendment to 9, which says that you, whatever you said.
Approve the funding request and to fund it from the regional fund.
Right.
4.1 million.
Wait, what was the figure? 4.1?
4.1.
4.1.
Is that, I would agree with that if we picked up the recommendation from Councillor Winters around the quid pro quo for free access for Bay of Plenty residents. I actually think that's a very elegant solution. We get, and our people get benefit, and we get a tourism icon and a cultural icon in Rotorua.
So Councillor Thompson has made an amendment to number 9 which if there's support from around the council table, will take as a substantive, because it's been no, from my perspective, there's been no pushback on any of the others. So do we have a seconder in terms of that? Councillor Winters. Oh, sorry. Mr. Brunning seconded it. Yes. Is there any further question, Crosby?
Is there an opportunity, because it's a charitable trust and a grant from us, that there could be a subvention payment back through that system through Quayside?
Potentially, Mr. Chairman. So in structuring any grant payment that you would make, we always look at this now because of previous grants that we've made. So we'll be working with Quayside and our tax advisors to see whether or not we can get the taxable benefit of the payment if council so wish.
Okay, any further comment? Sorry, Fiona.
So can I just be clear in terms of the new recommendation? On page 75, it talks about grants requested being 195,000 for 21-22, 3.625 for 22-23, and $278,000 for 23-24. The resolution that you're seeking to pass is the full amount of 4.1 million in 21-22.
However, look, I don't know the details.
As per what was submitted.
Okay, so we're clear with the resolution, which is we're adopting recommendations 1 through to 10 with a change to 9 to say that we make provision for the allocation of a $4.1 million grant for this particular project. The details of how that's appropriated to be determined by staff.
If we take those, is we taking that 9 separately?
I was going to include it in there and just delete the one that's in there now.
It's been asked, so that we take 9 separately.
Oh, yeah, if you want to do that. Okay, I'll do 1, 8 and 10. I move them.
A second.
Second. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Right, we'll deal with 9 as a separate issue. So it's a new motion put forward by Councillor Thompson, seconded Councillor Brunning. We provide $4.1 million, the appropriation of that to be determined by staff going forward. Do you want to have in there comes to the regional fund?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, to be funded from the regional fund. So all those in favour say aye.
Point of
Sorry,
clarity,
Councillor.
so that will be conditional. Free access for Bay of Plenty residents.
Yes.
Through Mr. Chairman, the wording is underneath the table. Rotary Lakes Council. That commitment has been made, I believe, in the meetings that have taken place so far.
So just a couple of points on that. The Rotary Lakes Council staff are proposing the no charge for a period of approximately 3 years. Also, under the current subvention payment rules, we may lose the ability to get a tax write-off if there are conditions on the grant. That would have to be checked through with Ernst & Young, our tax advisors, but that is one of the key considerations on what the difference between a contract and a charitable donation.
You could also, rather than have the accommodation in print, you could have an understanding, right?
Yeah.
Just for more clarity, Mr. Chairman, it's not going to open for 3 years.
No.
So it's not a pointless exercise having it free when you can't go to it.
3 years
From date of opening. Okay, we're all clear? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. Right, where are we
Now
now?
you're back outside.
8.9, councillors, page 168. Oh, sorry. I'll move a resolution that we carry on the meeting. We've done our 6 hours. Second, Mr. Rose. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried.
It was a sympathy vote for you,
I just remind councillors that this meeting has been recorded.
That's okay.
Right. Welcome, Sarah.
You've been waiting all day.
Siobhan, do you know which page you're on? Because we lost that, you know, which slide?
168, page 168.
Yeah, slide, you know, which slide? 35.
Where you go?
Thank you, Chair. There are a number of matters in this general matters paper, and we can go through each of them, which are quite separate, and deal with all the decisions right at the end. And that just requires some tag teaming, if that's okay.
It's fine.
The first matter is about the Regional Safety and Rescue Fund. And you'll remember the purpose of the Regional Safety and Rescue Fund is to have a single point of funding for those charitable services. So they're not having to apply for funding through TAs as well as ourselves at every annual plan or long-term plan process. So the intent is that it becomes a single source of funding replacing what's existing, as opposed to an additional funding that is above and beyond what's already funded to those services. You'll see there was overwhelming support, that's up on the slide there. A difference of views in terms of how much funding to provide. That's not the right slide. But overwhelming support to provide a funding mechanism for those rescue services. Some uncertainty around how that would be provided, and there are some complexities given the TAs are going through their long-term planning at the moment now. So what staff have recommended is to proceed with option 3 and to confirm $400,000 for that fund. And we've set out an implementation approach on page 175 of that paper, which is essentially that staff will run a proxy round this year. No one will be left behind. What some TAs have said, and you'll see that in the submissions, that they intend to proceed with what they've always done this year anyway. So we will work with them on agreeing on a funding mechanism, make sure no one misses out this round, and we're also looking at whether we can work this through the Civil Defence Emergency Management Group, because that's a group that's got St John's, police, fire and emergency all around the table, and could administer it together with the TAs in the future. So that's the recommendation for this matter.
Questions? Mr. Love?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been consulted on this as the chairman of CDMG, and I think it's a sensible suggestion and suggest we adopt it.
Thank you. Mr. Winters?
Yeah, I still have difficulty with this. I think it's a muddle, and until we've got certainty around it, I prefer to delay this for a year.
Thank you. Mr. Winters?
Can I move 2C? If we're going to do it in chunks, Mr. Chairman.
We can do it in chunks and have resolutions at the time if you like.
Yeah, please, because there's a whole lot of different topics in here, and I'd rather just deal with them piecemeal. So I move 2C.
So 2C, which is a staff recommendation, has been moved. It's been seconded. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Crosby?
Yeah, I do support it. It's a bit of a muddle at the moment. But can it be collected and not necessarily utilised in the year it's collected from a rates policy point of view? In other words, we could build up a reserve, and once it's all sorted, once there's clarity about the best and efficient use of it, it can then be distributed. Does the Rating Powers Act stop that? Mr. Rates expert.
Through you, Chair, my understanding is that the unallocated funds will then sit in reserve. And then
I do support it, but on the basis that we don't rush into expending it, that we take our time, work with the TLAs and maximise it as best we can with what they do.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Recommendation to C. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Keep going.
The next matter.
3B and 4B.
The opportunity to make a comment. I think we should have that first, Sarah.
Sure. With the Minister for Conservation signing the coastal plan, and last week at Strategy and Policy Council confirming an implementation date in August for that plan, staff have looked at what we can do to implement those new rules. You know that there's been a significant interest in these, and you've probably seen some of the social media chatter. But we've also had a lot of interest from other agencies, central government, regional councils, iwi, asking us what our implementation plan is, and that's part of the reason for coming here, to be very clear on what we intend to do from the 11th of August. Our recommendation is to continue a focus on education, and you can see that we have proposed a continued education budget, and also some on-water presence, which is primarily around education, and that's just talking to people that might be out in the water protection areas and explaining the rules and why they shouldn't be there, and also being able to respond if we get phone calls through to our 0800 number. It's a modest implementation. It's really focused on education, and we can deliver that through our existing compliance staff who are warranted to do that work, and a vessel that we've got based out of Tauranga here.
Is that the Awanui?
No, that's Taniwha.
Oh, the one we got there.
Which was the one that Matarangi were going to lease?
That's right, yes.
Oh, is that Taniwha?
That's Taniwha, yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yeah, quick question. In terms of the monitoring, weather, I mean, what are the workable days out there where there's likely to be recreational or in commercial traffic around that area? Have you got those figures?
Ministry for Primary Industries have provided us some information around how to determine that, because they use that for their when they're doing their compliance inspections on the water, and it's really a balance between those calm days, the types of fishing that will happen out there, and we would say possibly about 20 days that we could predict would be good fishing days, and that leaves a number of days ready for response if people call us up and say there's people out there that shouldn't be.
Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Clark. I heard you say you were going to move.
Yes.
So you're moving 3B and 4B?
Yes.
Mr. Winters?
Sarah, if we go out and find somebody there and they are illegally fishing, whatever, what is the penalties? Is it under our bylaws, a $200 fine, or is it MPI, full force of the law, confiscation of boat, trailer, fishing gear, etc.? What's the consequences of non-compliant on that fishing, on that being illegal out there?
The rule sits within the coastal plan, which is given effect through the RMA. So that's where we look at our warnings, our abatements, our $750 infringements, and our prosecutions.
Essentially, the court determines if you have to relinquish ownership of your boat.
We have been working closely with our legal team on this, and you will know that the rule says no damage or destruction, which is interesting to prove. So we will focus on education, and where we might need to use abatement notices, we would be thinking in the first 3 years. That's where our focus will be.
Anything else, councillors? Otherwise, it's been moved and seconded. Mr. Rose?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask in regards to the implementation and the actual the compliance side of things. Under option C, would that include a new staff member or no?
No, that's just more days on the water, which requires, more maintenance and fuel. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think the recommendation the resolution is 3B, 4B. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Right, thank you, Sarah. Number 5.
Number
And
5
6.
and number 6, yes, and these, just to be clear, the information provided for 5 and 6 are not related to the Motiti protection area. This relates to what staff have observed over summer and actually right through this year so far, which is a significant increase in the number of people on the water from Whakatane and right down east. We only have a single maritime officer servicing that whole area and struggled to keep up with the coverage that was required, in particular on busy times. Fishing competitions and nationals are getting busier and busier, Waihau Bay, and we have really struggled with one person to support that. So we have proposed an additional resource to ensure we can cover those areas and keep people safe. Not expecting numbers to decrease, particularly with the new Opotiki and Whakatane marina developments. There's just going to be more boats and more people on the water. The second part of that is that we have proposed potentially a new vessel to help support that busyness. A vessel that would look like Awanui, so she's a very large vessel with a crane on her that can do all sorts of work, lots of oil spill equipment. We've got more people, more risk of oil spills, and 2 marinas now that we will have to support with a lot more traffic. Councillor Nees, you had mentioned port fees and charges potentially as a mechanism, and while we will intend to on-charge the costs of navigation aid maintenance and the operational costs of those when it comes on board, and we can do that through the MTA regardless of our bylaw rules, our understanding is that those fees and charges wouldn't go to a CapEx cost of it.
Question, in an earlier email that we received, we were advised we had 3 vessels in Whakatane, but we've only got 1 maritime officer. Can you explain how that works? And we need another one?
Yes, very good questions. Through the summer, we tried with the number of patrols that we need to cover through weekends and basically a 24/7 coverage. We employ summer skippers, and so having smaller vessels and a number of skippers, we might have 3 or 4 skippers in Whakatane operating through the summer period, so they can be on a jet ski or a smaller vessel. Those aren't surveyed to go outside the harbour or necessarily very far from shore. So every vessel's got its own survey that Maritime New Zealand allow them to go out in different conditions. If we had an Awanui, for instance, she can go out in all conditions and she can go right out to Tuhua.
So if we get a new marine staff member, will we still be utilising the same number of summer skippers? Or is that staff member specifically for the boat? Because you're talking about getting the staff member on board now, but the boat doesn't come for 2 years.
We wouldn't need to take on as many summer skippers if we had an extra resource in Whakatane, no.
Move both the recommendations.
Sorry?
Move both the recommendations.
Okay, so both the recommendations are recruit staff cost at 95,000 and
6B.
6B.
The reason for that, just quickly, this is core business to this council and it's a growth industry. I saw some stats about new boats being built and sold. It's phenomenal. People aren't travelling, they're buying boats apparently. And so, while it's a bigger number, and I'm sure that 900,000 is Mr. Moneyman is probably from loans, paid back over a period of time. Yeah, so support it.
So that's been moved and seconded. So my only comment, because I feel uncomfortable about this, is that this proposal is to purchase this in 21-22. Capital spend on a boat. Is that right?
22-23.
Yeah, 22-23. It makes a little bit of difference because that reporting harbour thing is not going to be up till 24-25. I would imagine. And I'll just have a word of caution. when we go down to areas of Te Whanau Apanui, you should involve Te Whanau Apanui in terms of the observance, the kotiakitanga of that area of their foreshore. Because at times it can be fraught with difficulty. Don't walk in where angels fear to tread. That's my only comment about that. So otherwise, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Number 7.
Move 7C.
Move 7C. Thank you, Councillor Thompson.
Second.
Seconded, Mr. Rose. Any discussion? If not, put the resolution. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Number 8.
I'll move 8B.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? These, as you know, are the College Road upgrades behind the houses, not part of the original capital project that we did. So discussion, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you.
I had some nice pictures for you.
Number 9. Yes, where you go?
Right, got to go to councillors and staff. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Ford Road Pump Station, obviously quite a bit of words in there, and what I wanted to do is to show you some pictures which sort of help explain a few things. The first one is basically in response to the submission from the Kaituna Liver Control Scheme Advisory Group, that they've had an impaired level of service over the years. In the report, I talked about the fact that that's the first report that we've had of that. And this is obviously in consultation with Bruce Craig, who of course has been around for quite some time. The modelling that we've done is depicted in this map here, where we've got our level of service. And you can see, apart from the Makatu estuary, there's just isolated patches where we don't achieve that level of service. And those are depressions in the ground that all the farmers know exactly, where those depressions are. And it doesn't matter how big the pump is at the pump station, that those depressions are still there and the water still ponds there. So, that's our evidence to say, no, there hasn't been an impaired level of service. Moving on and just talking about the relevance of the location. And so the Ford Road Pump Station sits within the coastal environment. And so that the yellow line is the coastal environment, and the various hatched areas are the areas of significant, what do they call them? Indigenous biodiversity areas and outstanding natural features, of which, of course, the Makatu estuary is one. Just incidentally, all those additional dots there are all the other pump stations that we have, which also lie within that coastal environment area. The point of this is to basically to say, regardless of when the pump station was going to be constructed, whether it was before the Kaituna rediversion or afterwards, it's still got the same rules applied. And so that if we were to build a pump station in that area, we would have still had to have complied with water quality and obviously the effects on those biodiversity areas. Okay, in terms of the options, just graphically just showing the two options that we've got. The one in the blue is option 1, and that's basically showing that we need to improve some the drains with the sort of the T on its side, and then the pump station itself adjacent to the existing diagonal drain, as opposed to option 6B, which is the mustard coloured one on the right, which is essentially building the pump station and just back from the existing pump station site, but would actually have to have 2 discharge pipes put under the water and up the other side of the saline block. Now, when I say 2 discharge pipes, one is an option on the right-hand side, which is unfavoured by the Coast Guard, and the other option is on the left-hand side there, and that's unfavoured by the commercial fishermen. And obviously there's quite a considerable cost difference between option 1 at 9.9 million and option 6B, which is at about 17.6, I think it is. So that's the pictures that I was going to show you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Yeah, and this one here, particularly in reference to the Kaituna, I guess the assumption is most of this is going to come out of the Kaituna River scheme now, and it currently exists over the 80-20 situation, but I question whether there's not more of a 50-50 public benefit actually in this one because of the subdivision potential around determinant, etc., flowing into that area. So in terms of the funding, should we actually be looking like seeking a slightly different allocation of resource as to how the cost of that is split?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So I've attempted to answer that within the paper in response to the submission. They talked about all sorts of developments which are occurring upstream. And what we've confirmed in the paper is that there's only actually one development which affects this particular subcatchment, and that's the Rangitāiki Business Park. And there are quite strict conditions around that resource consent application. We're still in discussions with the consultant Saracen Greystons in that regard. So personally, I don't see how they are affected by upstream development because we can't see it.
Just acknowledging the submissions and the concerns that you make.
So the question from me is, given the importance of the wetland creations that we've been putting in place in the lower part of the catchment, and you had it on the previous one, which is just adjacent to the TLA, relative to the ultimate decision that's going to have to be made in terms of the Bidelay farm, I think he still owns it, is the pump station going to be in the right place?
A key component of these options is we know that the water is of dubious quality, and there's obviously requirements under the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management to improve discharges. What we've sort of discussed, and this has been a big feedback for MiWi, is that putting these pump stations, first of all, the diagonal. If we move Ford Road pump station to a diagonal, we'll improve the water by 85% heading into the estuary. But there needs to be changes in farm practices upstream to basically get to closer to that 100%, and that's acknowledged by iwi. In terms of that option 6B, we get an improvement so that we're basically going to have none of that dirty water would actually go into the Makatu estuary, but obviously at considerable cost. And then we've got these issues with the two users in that area as well. But also underpinning that, regardless of which option we go with, the feedback from MiWi is this needs to be considered in line with the general water quality improvement over the years for the entire catchment.
I understand that, but the ultimate decision you're going to have to make is whether places adjacent to the Ford Road pump station are sustainable in the land use they are, or whether you buy them out and turn them into a wetland.
Yeah, that's a very long-term question, and certainly the initial feedback for the first 2 years with iwi was exactly that, revert all of the farmland to wetland. But yeah, that's not the proposition that we've got here. That might be something that happens in the future, but when that is, I can't tell you now.
Okay, Councillor Liz.
Yeah, and I'm pretty certain I know the answers to these, but the diagonal drain and the Ford Road one both provide the same level of service?
Correct, yes. So there's actually a third pump station further over there on the right, which is the Makatu. And so those three pump stations basically service that same subcatchment.
Great, and the diagonal drain option supported by the advisory group?
Correct.
And an upgraded diagonal drain pump station won't negatively impact any of the wetlands that have been built in that area?
Correct.
Anything else? Otherwise, I'll just quickly reading. Where's your recommended one here? 9B. Yeah, sorry, I just recommended it.
Happy to move that one.
Happy to move. Move, Mr. Locke. Seconded, councillor Nees. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Whakatane River Urban Stock Bank upgrade.
Yeah, so that's really just bringing to your attention that there is a lot of work that is required in the Whakatane area, and we need to start consulting more earnestly, if you like, with the local community around different options. I've sort of highlighted there that at the worst, if we upgraded the stock banks and floodwalls in Whakatane, then we're looking at a considerable amount of money, $4 to $5 million a year for sort of 4 years. And we need to really start progressing the RSS or upper catchment options. So that's really the purpose is to highlight that, and that we wanted to highlight it more by actually putting a specific 80,000 or taking 80,000 out of our budget and saying that's actually for consultation.
Move, sorry, T.
Councillor Nees.
Sorry, just a question. So this is general rate funded? This is general rate funded, it's not scheme funded?
It's scheme funded.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Chris just whispered in my ear to say that we're going to have a bit of a workshop with councillors at the strategy and policy.
Oh, whenever councillors want it, monitoring and ops or strategy and policy. But it lends itself not to this sort of forum at this time of day, but more of a workshop. And this is really the first time the RSS project has become a catchment community conversation about climate change in action. So there's some hard calls to be made here, and we've said, let's stop for a year, communicate with the affected community, and they can decide with us the way forward rather than put numbers in the budgets right now. So that's what we want to do.
And what I can say is this actually issue is causing a lot of angst and uncertainty around Whakatane, around the options. So sooner the better we have this one. I'm happy to move.
Move. Thank you, councillor Ida. I'll second it. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you.
There might be just one left about.
Minor river schemes.
Yeah, the minor ones.
11B, move.
Move. Thank you, councillor Winters. Seconded, councillor Rose. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you.
Move 12.
And we'll catch a 12 on that resolution as well, eh? Right. Thank you. Right.
Yep.
I move we go to public excluded.
We just got to receive it.
I'll second.
It's seconded, councillor Thurston. All those in favour say aye. So any comment in terms of the papers? I have a summing up in terms of confirmation of the decisions you've made and the impact.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So rather than repeat all of the decision you've taken, because obviously council are well aware of that, does council want to give me direction on page 3 of the finance paper, all of the recommendations there, number 1 to 9? If you want to give me direction that the rates increase should stay at the 5.8% in year 1, the general rates, and 3% in years 2 and 3, as set out in that recommendation, and then the targeted rates to be adjusted following the decisions you've made, and some of those affect passenger transport target rates, of course, and also to make the adjustments to reserves that you've made, including the $4.1 million from regional fund to fund the museum, the loss in revenue the consequence of that, as well as the other changes that affect general funds, the extra money for youth engagement, that those should be included and increase the amount that we're taking from the regional fund for those 3 years. So if you want to keep the general rates at the 5.8%, the 3 and the 3, do you wish to give me direction that we adjust the regional fund contribution that we suggested at the beginning of the paper, which was on average $2.6 million a year, the 8 million, that would be the amount that would be adjusted by the decisions you've taken so far? And if you do that, then we'll prepare the draft LTP for your adoption in June on that basis.
Councillor Nees.
I hesitate to be difficult, but I'd rather see what the regional fund is going to look like following that approach before I sign that off. So can you give us some sort of...
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Debbie's got a headline figure to...
And in addition, the equalisation reserve.
Through you, Chair, we're just a bit cautious at the moment around allocating the regional fund reserve. We forecast the balance to be around $1 million as at the 30th of June 2021. Yeah, the equalisation reserve. In respect of the regional fund, I'd modelled up an assumed level of spend, and that's set out. I'll just refer you to the reserves section of the financial overview report. It is item 8.1.
Page 15.
Page 14 of the late agenda. In addition, at the moment, we would forecast at the end of LTP year 3. Before today's decisions, we were forecasting $14.8 million in that reserve. We would look to deduct $4.1 million increase the spending from that reserve, so that takes us back to about 10.7 million. And then we're recommending a further 500,000 per annum over the first 3 years of further withdrawal to help cushion the impact of the rates increases, the general rates increases, to maintain our forecast rates increases, the general rates real increase of 5.8% for year 1 and 3% for the next 2 years.
So, sorry, does that mean that the regional fund will look at somewhere around 9 million at the end of the 3 years?
Yep.
Through you, Chair, so in summary, as Debbie has said, the new funding that you have deliberated on today, in addition to all of the other funding in the budgets and in these papers, is $75,000 for youth engagement, which is new funding, and also to increase the climate change projects from $175,000 to $350,000. So Debbie is sort of putting that together in terms of that 500,000.
In addition to that, there would be the investment revenue foregone by using an extra $4.1 million of regional fund reserve to support the Rotorua Museum.
Question, Mr. Chairman. On the Tauranga PT investment, that's what I call it, it's not expenditure, investment, which we collectively support. 2 of the items are hinged on other entities. So if that doesn't come to pass, but we've struck our rate, well, that extra money, and it's about, could be $6 to $8 roughly, maybe, could be more, won't be less. Does that just go into the reserve? Or do you have a mechanism of a timeline when you decide to strike that rate, which has to be in late June?
Yeah.
So I'm just concerned about the timing. I know Tauranga City's LTP is a month out of sync, yes, as an example. EZTA goes through the national program and bounces back. You won't know that. I'm assuming you might get an indication by end of June, but you may not get a decision. So how's that going to work in terms of setting our targeted rate for PT, knowing other parties are required to make a decision because it's contingent on that? Will it just go?
So through you, Chair, on the Tauranga schools, the current trial, we already assume a very conservative level of funding from Wakakotahi. So the Tauranga targeted rate has consumed all of the extra operating costs associated with the current trial, as well as the fair revenue foregone. So we're holding the assumption that Wakakotahi largely will maintain its funding on that trial through the 10 years. There is a minor risk around our assumption around the permanent fare policy for the tertiary fare free. But at the moment, the fare revenue foregone extra impact is around 264,000. I don't think there's going to be much in addition to that impact, even with the co-funding side of things. But we will come back, I think, by June to confirm the level of co-funding for the tertiary policy, fare policy. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Nees.
Could I just ask that once staff have done this work, before it comes formally back, the LTP comes formally back to us in June, that we get some visibility as to what it looks like, just in case it's not a very pretty picture, and we need to think, is this really what we want?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we'll do that, and we'll provide that on one of the informal briefings that we have for council.
Right, so I've got to deal with the recommendations in your financial overview. Now, so can you step us through the recommendations? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's fine, right? As long as we want to maintain year 1 LTP at 5.8. 3% LTP is 2 or 3.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
That's right, so they're right?
Yeah.
B, 4B is fine. Capital expenditure in C is fine. In terms of 5A, that's all right. Most total borrowings. B, relative, oh no, it's still borrowings. I'm just going, no, we're taking from reserves. How do you want to accommodate the 4 million you're going to?
Through Mr. Chairman, we can either add it in here as a separate resolution, but you've already got that resolution in that paper, so we'll bring that through forward because you've resolved that already about the 4.1 and taking that from the reserve, so we don't have to duplicate it.
Okay, and 5C, that stands?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Right, and number 6 stands. As does.
And 7 will still be an unbalanced budget because of the grant funding that's going to be made, so that won't change.
Okay.
So as it stands, Mr. Chairman, with the direction that you've now given us.
Yeah. Is everybody clear on that? So essentially in terms of the increased cost, you're going to utilise some of the reserve funding and the $4.1 million for Rotorua. You're going to do that as well from the reserves account. Sorry?
Move acceptance.
Move, thank you. Seconded, Councillor Thompson. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried.
And can I just ask for one more recommendation, that is just that you confirm all in-principle decisions made in the deliberations papers to date, just for belts and braces.
Move, Mr. Running, seconded, Mr. Rose. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Mr. White, I think we deserve a closing trade here before we have a Saint Blanc or whatever it is.
Kia ora, tātou e miana kia koutou, mō koutou kāro pai, kōrero pai e runga te kapapanui o tui mana. Nō reira tēnā koutou e karakia poto mō tātou. Kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a Ukraine. Ke te aroha ti atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua taku.
Right, thank you, councillors, for a full day, but I think a very productive day. As I said, if you want to have a quick wine before you shoot home, then let's go downstairs.